Good day. Today's lecture is devoted to the main methods of teaching at the university. This topic is of particular importance because university education depends not only on the content of instruction, but also on the means by which this content is communicated, understood, and transformed into intellectual and professional competence. Therefore, the question of teaching methods belongs to the central foundations of higher pedagogy. It determines how learning is organized, how students are guided from knowledge reception to knowledge construction, and how academic work acquires professional value. At the outset, the lecture formulates three closely connected objectives. First, students are expected to understand and distinguish the main types of teaching methods used at university level. Second, it is necessary to define what a teaching method is and to clarify its essential characteristics. Third, attention must be given to the classification of methods according to the nature of student cognitive activity. Accordingly, the lecture combines conceptual clarification with methodological systematization. In this regard, its purpose is not merely descriptive. Rather, it seeks to form a professional understanding of why different methods exist and under what educational conditions each becomes most effective. A teaching method is defined here as a system of sequential and interrelated actions of teacher and students that ensures the assimilation of educational content. This definition is especially important because it presents the method not as an isolated technique, but as an organized form of activity directed toward a pedagogical aim. The slide further identifies three central dimensions: purpose, process, and interaction. Purpose indicates the goal of training, process concerns the path of learning itself, interaction refers to the relationship between the subjects of education. Therefore, a teaching method should be understood as a structured unity of aim, action, and pedagogical relation. The first classification is based on the source of information transmission and the way in which that information is perceived. Several categories are distinguished here: practical, visual, verbal, and working with a book. While the slide also refers to the video method as an additional form, practical methods include experiments, exercises, and productive work. Visual methods include illustration, demonstration, and observation. Verbal methods include explanation, story, conversation, lecture, instruction, and discussion. Work with a book includes reading, quoting, note-taking, and the preparation of plans or bibliographies. Finally, the video method integrates viewing, reflection, control, and exercises under digital guidance. Thus, the classification reveals the wide variety of channels through which knowledge may be organized and mastered. The next classification approaches teaching methods through the structure of the personality. This perspective is especially significant because it recognizes that education addresses not one dimension of the learner, but several. The slide distinguishes three such dimensions: consciousness, behavior, and feelings. Methods directed toward consciousness include story, conversation, and display. Behavior is influenced through exercises, training, and self-management. Feelings are addressed through such forms as approval, praise, blame, and control. Consequently, effective teaching must be multidimensional. It should shape not only what the student knows, but also how the student acts and responds emotionally within the educational process. The slide then turns to several major verbal methods: story, explanation, and conversation. Story is valuable when the aim is to provide cultural orientation and value content through reliable facts, vivid examples, and logically organized presentation. Explanation serves a different purpose. It reveals the essential properties of the subject and clarifies laws, rules, and relationships through logical proof. Conversation, by contrast, is especially useful for activating prior knowledge and personal experience, thereby involving students in active intellectual search and independent generalization. Therefore, even within verbal methods, clear functional differences exist. Each method serves a particular pedagogical task and should be chosen accordingly. This slide combines two significant areas: work with literature and visual methods. Work with literature includes note-taking, planning the text, formulating theses, peer review, drawing diagrams, and creating a matrix of ideas. These practices are pedagogically important because they transform reading from passive exposure into analytical and productive work. At the same time, The slide identifies visual methods such as illustration, demonstration, and laboratory experiments. It also refers to forms of organization: individual, paired, group, and collective. Accordingly, the educational process is shown here as a combination of cognitive operations, visual support, and organizational design. A particularly important classification is the one proposed by I.Y.A. Lerner and M.N. Skatkin in 1965. It includes 5 methods arranged according to the increasing activity and independence of students: explanatory and illustrative, reproductive, problem statement, partially search, and research method. The methodological significance of this sequence lies in its developmental logic. Each subsequent method requires a higher degree of student initiative, intellectual participation, and independence. Therefore, this classification is valuable not only descriptively, but also as a guide to the progressive intensification of cognitive activity in university teaching. The next slide identifies the defining features of active learning methods. Among them are the mandatory activation of thinking, stable and long-term involvement, the transformation of academic work into independent creative activity, a high degree of motivation and emotional engagement, constant interaction between students and teacher, and student reflection on their own learning and cooperative activity. In addition, several structural features are emphasized: problems, adequacy to future professional tasks, peer teaching, small group work, and spontaneity, together with independence in dealing with educational information. Consequently, active learning differs from traditional instruction, not only in external form, but in the internal logic of student participation. The final thematic slide presents several examples of active training methods. Analysis of specific situations allows students to study concrete problems and evaluate possible solutions. Discussion creates a space in which opinions are exchanged on the basis of fact and logic rather than emotion. Brainstorming stimulates collective generation of alternative solutions. The project method organizes independent work around a meaningful result. The business game simulates real processes within a conditional environment and is especially effective for mastering material, consolidating knowledge, and developing communication and creativity. The slide concludes with a particularly important principle. Interaction becomes the basis of educational self-government when the teacher gradually transfers elements of management to students themselves. This point is pedagogically decisive because it shows that the highest form of teaching is reached when students become capable of organizing intellectual activity with increasing independence and responsibility. Thank you for your attention. I hope this lecture has clarified the main methods of teaching at the university and has shown how their classification and thoughtful application contribute to cognitive development, student independence, and professional formation.